So just make yourself comfortable. Just take top off a little bit this. Rubbing your hands together. Then gently tapping over your face. And over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. One. The other side. Onto your chest. Belly. And finally your legs. Good. Okay. So just sit back in the chair, feet out in what I refer to as the reclining position. So it's like you're sitting in a deck chair. Sometimes you'll probably feel something like the tops of your legs and buttocks on the chair, and somewhere along the middle or upper part of your back, depending on how tall you are and how you put the chair and things. Just feeling your weight dropping back into the chair. And looking for a sense of any kind of stiffening, tightening, particularly in those points of contact with the chair, just kind of melting away, dissolving away. So you gradually get this feeling of sort of almost being absorbed by the chair in those areas. Just feel the response of the rest of your body to that. So, for instance, I tend to find that as I manage to let my back and my shoulders soften, so there's both a kind of opening out of the chest and the ribs, but also a kind of, again, sort of almost dissolving away of tightness. It's like I pulled the plug out of a sink of water and just allowed all the water to gradually drain out. About the breathing, if you just place your hands on your belly, just on or slightly below your navel, see if you can just feel a little bit of movement there. And if you can't, you might try and just very gently reduce the movement by pushing your belly up, pushing your hands up as you breathe in. What you may also find is that in doing that, you're still pushing back a little bit with your lower back. Don't do too many of these because it really is quite a small movement, especially to begin with. It just means that our breathing begins, the process of breathing begins in your belly. You're not literally breathing into your belly, but you're using the muscles of your lower abdomen to create a kind of suction, so the air is drawn into your lungs. So the expansion will be belly, solar plexus, and then chest. Abdominal breathing, or bellows breathing, as it's sometimes referred to. And because we recognise you may feel that little bit of movement in your back, it's quite difficult to reproduce it standing because we need that support for our back. So this is quite commonly practiced laying down with your knees up, or in a chair like this with your back supported. Much harder to do in the upright position. If we now come to the upright position, you bring your feet in and try and have some of your weight forwards. I'm generally quite a long way forwards in the chair when I do this. You want to be supported by your feet and your hips, but don't overlook the work that your back and spine are doing, because to maintain a comfortable upright stance requires practice, so that the muscles of your back and the muscles in between the vertebrae in your spine and so on just gradually condition. And over a period of time, this will be a posture that is more within your capacity, and that's when it will be comfortable. If you're straining a little bit, you'll very quickly get tired and you'll probably just slump down. So if that's the case, it's better to sit back a little bit. Most chairs have backs that slope slightly back, and I turn around there, so you can see that the back of the chair slopes back. And if I do this, I've got just a little bit of support for the lower part of my back there, and I am in any case going to be tilting forwards. If your back gets really tired, just sit back and rest, but try and do the exercises from this posture where you've got a slight angle down, but if you can imagine, I'll just show you something. I get this stick and to put it down about 2/3 of the way forward, well, about 1/3 of the way forwards there. This is my reference point. So if I'm totally upright, I'm a little bit far back, but if I go just slightly forward, so there is this slight tilt forwards as we come into the chair. Standing, we would be upright. So there aren't any straight lines in your body. So this is imaginary. This is why I'm demonstrating it like this. Even standing, our bodies are not totally straight. There are curves and so on and so forth. But we try and keep that line in mind, so that we're never too far away from it. I sometimes describe it as being like a post, a mooring post that a boat is tied to. When we move away from it, we can only move away so far because we just get drawn back to it. So if, for instance, I'm tilting forwards as we do in some of the movements, there's a limit beyond which here I'm straining. I can feel my back tightening up, but here I haven't moved so far from that center line that I've lost the support of my feet in particular, and also my hips. So it's good to have that mental image of the line, so going from the crown of your head downwards, or something like that. So all that very much kind of in the back of your mind. This is the sort of the map that we work with. Just slowly turning your head. You know, if your back gets tired, do sit back and rest. Mostly the support for your back will come from underneath, from your hips, your pelvis, your legs. And that's where the breathing becomes tricky, because remember, when we sat back, we could feel the expansion in our back as well as in the front. To get that kind of breathing working in the upright stance, you really have to sort of like rely on the support from beneath. So your root becomes important for your breathing as well as other things. Hands in front of your shoulders. Going forwards. Hands down to your sides. Imagine a round pillar or ball either side of you. Just rotating your arms. And then winding around. And back the other way. Rest. Now tilting forwards. Using your legs to push you back. Try and just avoid any kind of sense of stiffening or tightening or pulling in your neck or your back. And certainly don't tilt your head back to come back up. It should be a function of your legs mostly. A little bit of a pull from your hips. So as you go forwards, imagine somebody sitting behind your chair, just grabbed hold of your belt. You go forwards and then you feel the pull back. And this should leave your upper body nice and soft, still with that sense of space within your body, which always is important for all internal functions. So a sense of movement within your body. And then turn a little. The other direction. And then going around. A little tilting, rolling movement in the pelvis, moving your shoulders and your head. So all movement comes from below, shall we say. Back the other way. And come back to the upright position. Push one foot forwards, heel, toes, press into the ground gently. Make sure you're not straining your knee, and then back. And on the other side. Just to refer back to your breathing, as always, never force this. If it's not comfortable for you, just ignore what I'm saying. But when we're sitting back, and I was talking about breathing with that little bit of movement in your belly, I draw your attention to your back, and with support, your back is able to be part of that general expansion in that lower region. when we're sitting in the chair, we haven't really got that much support behind the back. I mean, you may have a little bit. Most of it comes below. If you're going to do that, then when you breathe in, where before you may have felt a little bit of pressure between your back and the chair, now what you want to feel is a bit of pressure downwards through your hips. And that's a tricky prospect. So it's almost like when we breathe in, there's a kind of horizontal movement, if you like, but the rear part of that gets transformed into a vertical movement going downwards. So it sort of does that thing. A lot of that just comes from understanding and an ability to redirect movement in your body, which of course is one of the things that we are training. But you can see it feels, you know, it's a little bit tricky, which is why I always offer the breathing method in a reclining position, and just say to people, practice it that way, and then eventually you'll find a way of doing it when you're upright, whether seated or standing. So just think about that if it's useful to you. But now, weight back into your hips, 2/3 of your weight in your hips here. Hands to your sides again, palms of your hands facing forwards, and then ease forward, so more of your weight up to about maybe 60% goes into your feet, and then back. Hands turning as you do. Really what you want to do is to go forwards and stop before you feel that there's any sense of tightening up in your back or your shoulders. So the 60% of your weight in the front of your feet when we go forwards is a guideline for you to work with. What you want to do is increasingly begin to rely on a kind of intuitive sense of what's going on within your body. It's something, again, that Tai Chi really encourages. The bird folds its wings. And then fisherman cast the net. And your hands and arms beginning to swing through a little bit. So you're moving through water. Now, as you come back this time, leaving your arms out in front. So there's a ball in front of you. Just rolling the ball in towards you. Put your hands down, start again. So your arms swing through. Try and avoid stiffening up in your shoulders as you do this. A lot of these things I mentioned, like stiffening your shoulders at this point, are very habitual. They're ways of moving that we've established over years and years quite often. So they're not going to go away quickly, but we just keep reminding ourselves, this is not the shoulders lifting. Use an image like, imagine somebody leaning on your shoulder from behind, so that gradually your body finds different ways of meeting the movement requirement. Often ways that are much more conducive to our body's structure. There's nothing imposed on that. Like water will, if water running downhill meets a barrier, then it will find a way around that barrier. Now from here, draw your hands apart and forwards. Sit back. So you've got an elastic band between your hands that you're pulling out and then just letting it contract, but quite slowly. Notice the range of movement in your hands. They actually start in front of your belly and they start to get pushed out and they end up just under shoulder height. So this fits in with the expanding breathing method that I showed you, the bellows breathing, starting in the belly, moving into solar plexus and then into your chest. I think probably because of that, people have said that they do find this movement, pigeon spreads its wings, one that's quite good for working with the breath with. So, you know, that interests you. It's in breath as you come back, out breath as you go forward. Just the pattern for this particular movement. One more time. And then pushing away, your hands come back in front of your hips, your elbows go out again, turn your hands, press forward. So you're pushing into water, pushing a boat in water or something like that. And then your hands drop down, a loose fist. You should be able to get your finger comfortably poking through. Going forwards, rotating your hands so they would be palm down if they are open, and then back. Punch with both fists. Trying to avoid having to lift your hands. Side, I'll just show you with this up. See, it's like almost like a piston, drawing back and pushing out. So it doesn't draw back that far, but a lot of the movement gets absorbed in that rotation of your arm. When you push out, elbows still stop, don't lock the arm out. So what we're trying to avoid is this, lifting up and punching from here. It's a nice smooth movement. You could almost just let your hand rest on the top of your leg there and push out. That would be the very lazy way of doing it. That's not quite high enough for me. I want to be here, but what I don't want to do is to go up and then try and push like that. Do one more of these. Then we'll go back to pigeon spreads its wings. A little sequence of 3. So starting with pigeon spreads its wings. And then pushing away. And then punch with both fists. Back to the pigeon. One more round of this. the end of this movement, just open your hands, turn them out a little bit, draw them back in, so they wind around, end up in front of your hips, and again you press forwards. One more time. So this time, bring your hands back, but then turn them palm down, turn in your hips, tilt forwards again. Feel as though your hips are dropping back into the chair. This is polishing the table. Remember, there is always a counterbalancing movement in Tai Chi. And it's often the counterbalancing movement, as I just described it, which is the important one. So you go forwards because your pelvis tilts and because your weight moves forwards a little bit, not because you're straining in your back. You turn because you're turning in and around your hips, not straining your shoulders or twisting your back up. So it's important that you feel that hanging back of the hips. So there's a little bit of a push downwards and backwards into the chair through your hips, the back of the pelvis, around about here, as you just do a little bit of a turn and you come back. So I turn a little bit to my left, that'll be your right, and then I sink down and I sort of push, almost like I'm going to try and push myself out the chair. And I do that, I just let that movement move my shoulders, my arms. When we come to standing, that counterbalancing effect of our hips becomes even more important and even more obvious. Now this time, bring your hands in, coming back to that stance that I describe as upright, it's almost upright. Turn your hands palm up. Now push down gently through your feet and your hips at the same time. So you feel a little bit of an upward movement. Feel that coming up through your back, expanding through the whole of your body. And then draining away and allowing the sun to press down. Maybe feeling almost a kind of tingling going up and down your back. Expanding like a wave into the front of your body. And then turn your hands out and the wild goose. So with this lovely image of the bird in flight. Tips in. Notice elbows hanging down here, exaggerated slightly. Notice also that as I push down through my feet and my hips, the first part of my arm to respond is going to be my elbows. And it's better to do that than to think in terms of, lifting your arms. If you're lifting your arms, it would be a bit stiff. If I exaggerate this, if you say, when my elbows go out, my hands and fingers follow, and then I let the elbows drop down, and that just changes the relative position of them. That was exaggerated, but you can begin to feel that, and then you get this nice sort of almost wave-like quality going through your arm. and then easing forwards. Parting the clouds. Same thing with the elbows leading your wrists leading your fingers. That really is just an extension of that idea that all movement starts from low down in your body. So we start it from here, the hands come down, the hips push forwards a little bit, the feet push you back, and then between them, they start to push upwards. Just like the breathing starts from your belly, not from high up in your chest. So too does all movement come from deeper in and further down your body. And again, we can see that as a counterbalancing movement. That has to happen before we can reach out. And will have an effect of just slightly limiting how far you can reach out, because there's always the intent to remain soft. So there's only so far I can go before I start to stiffen up. And we want to be able to just gently expand that range of movement, but not force it, not push hard against it. So it's almost like, and this is quite a good exercise perhaps with this image, it's almost like you imagine a plant growing up out of the seed. It also puts down roots at the same time, beforehand really. And then with the root system in place, the plant or whatever it is can just expand outwards and open up. Now, let your hands drop down. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Pushing up, keeping your hands slightly in front of your body, and then like you're plucking an apple off the tree, pulling down. Open your hands. Switch sides. Again, your elbow moving a little bit before your hand and fingers, and then switch sides again. Take your time. Aware of the weight of the other arm as you push one hand up. Let's do this one more time. Still aware of the weight of your arms. Simply bend your elbows, bring your hands around just a little bit, pushing up and slowly down. Just let your shoulders drop. For a moment, just feeling the weight of your arms again, and then pushing out. So your arms should be quite heavy. They are quite heavy. But often what we do is we kind of do this. We hold them very stiff. So we don't appreciate the weight of the arms. If you aim to do that, several things that actually come into line. One is it slows you down because you have to wait until now you can feel it before you push out. And that stops the tendency to rush in movements like this. We get to here, so I've got to go into the next one. So, oh no, I've got to feel that weight in my arms. It also means that you're less likely to stiffen up in your shoulders. So here, if I'm like this, you see my shoulders, I have to feel the weight of my arms. I've got to let my shoulders drop. And that will have an effect across chest and upper back. That will also, opening up your chest will help your breathing, of course. This time, as you push out, turn just a little bit, very carefully and gently. Turn comes again from the lower part of your body, your hips and your waist. Now turn the other way. Coming back, bringing your hands back to the starting position. So now your hands push out. So we've got 4 planes of movement, 4 directions. One is to push up. 2 and 3 involve this careful, gentle turning in hips and waist. And then for the same, push sideways, but no turn. One more round. And then extend one foot, ease forwards, scooping the sea, and looking at the sky. You can perhaps appreciate here, even seated, this one of the kind of really important elements, or the importance of one of the important elements, the sinking back of your hips. You know, imagine that person hanging on to your belt from behind the chair to stop you falling forward. It's like you could just stumble out of the chair. It's not very likely, but it can happen. And of course, there are strong implications for the standing exercises and just generally standing up when we consider that. Now, hollow fist again, coming back and grasping the tiger's ears. So those counteracting movements, the backward, the downward movements, are actually the very things that help us to remain stable. And then on the other side, scooping the sea and looking at the sky. Make sure this knee is a little bit bent. A gentle stretch in your calves and hamstrings. And then hands fisted. Now bring it back. So we want to feel supported in this posture. Now obviously seated like this, you're going to feel supported by the chair, but particularly if you're sitting forwards without the back of the chair to support. The support for the upper body comes from the base, from the foundation of the feet and your hips. From your back, and in particular that area around your spine, like a column, right, rising up. And then the image I sometimes give to people for the posture, and this is again in some ways more significant standing, I guess. It's like if you can imagine a tent, and what a tent has is and kind of in a framework in one way or another, and then draped over that is the skin of the tent. And that's pegged down, and then attached to that are guy ropes, and they're pegged down. So if you imagine you've got support of the feet and the hips, then either the spine, or you imagine maybe spine and collarbone. You've got the frame if you like, within your body. And then things like your actual skin and the fascia and various soft tissues form the skin going over, and then muscles and tendons and ligaments and so on and so forth form the guide ropes. And so as we sit here like this, both forwards and backwards and left and right, we want to feel that, if you like, to take the analogy, that the guide ropes, say going from the shoulders down to the ground, are equal. If they weren't, if this one was tighter than that one, I'd be leaning over. And the same goes forwards and backwards and on all sorts of levels. So we're held by a combination of different aspects of the body in this position, and that's how we manage to maintain an upright position. That and the roots dropping the center of gravity help us to maintain the upright position without straining. And that's something that we want to try and bring into the standing section as well. So just rubbing your hands together and then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. Upper part of your chest. And your belly. And your legs. And then just pushing up from the ball of your foot to the knee, going up and down. And then a circle. The other side. And circle. Good. Okay, then stand. So we want to feel the support from the feet, and this is all related to the breathing as well. If you going back to the tent analogy, if I'm a tent blowing in the wind, I have a certain, you put a tent up well, it will swing from side to side. Maybe you could pushing it on one day, it would lean over, but then it would always come back. It would lean over and always come back. And so what we want to do is to establish that upright position. And you can imagine here, there you can see there's one possible straight line, and then from the side there's the other one that I imagine going through my body. What I can do is I can go back a little way from this. I can go forwards a little way from this. But then suddenly here, if I go too far, my calves are stiff. And if I go to here, I have to go forwards. It's like the tent being blown so much that the pegs on one side come out, if that makes sense. That's a useful analogy for us. So in the first instance, we establish this central, what we call central equilibrium, this central posture, which is the one that's going to enable us to establish a quality. When we start to move out from that, we can move out from that, but there's always limits to those movements. So just give yourself a moment to feel this posture. Your weight slightly forwards in your feet. So just 2/3 of your weight, 70% of your weight in the front half of your feet. And then your hips dropping back. And that, so again, if you watch that with the pole, I'll exaggerate a little bit. You see the pole's going roughly through the crown of my head. I tilt forwards, now my head's a long way forwards. But if I let the hips drop back, that should have brought me back into line. My weight will stay forwards because my pelvis is tucked under. And because the hips have done this, that begins the process of my center of gravity dropping, the rooting down. What you want to be careful of is from this position, a common response, an habitual response, is to do this. So, if you're standing on a slope, you can stand on the slope. And after a while, you start to think, my back's a bit stiff. That's because your body's trying to do this. A much more fundamental, a much better response is to do this. That's what, if you ever try to drag a dog somewhere where it didn't want to go, it will drop its haunches back. If you watch a tug of war team where they got hold of the rope, they don't take hold of the rope and then do this. They take hold of the rope and do this when they pull. And then when they're trying to be pulled, it's only when they get pulled along that they start to go back like that. But that's with the support of the rope. Somebody sort of like throws you a rope and says, "Pull on this." You do this. So it's not an unnatural response, and it does help with this sinking of your center of gravity. So sinking down and then pushing up. And then sinking down and pushing up. Bring your hands around in front of you. So the further you move out of that position, the more likely you are to experience stiffening, tightening in muscles in your body. The more likely you are to get to a point where you're straining all through your body, maybe losing balance or whatever. But in this position, so this is a very straightforward movement to begin with. And going back to our breathing, I talked about our breath being supported, if you like, by the back when we're in the chair. Here, it's not so much your hips that get pushed down like they did in the chair, but as you breathe in, it actually coincides with a slight push downwards. That's assuming you're breathing in when you push up. Even if you're not breathing, when you push down through your feet, if you're not keeping to a breathing pattern, keep breathing. I said that very badly. Keep breathing, but even if you're not following the pattern of breathing in when you push up, that push down there, you can feel it pushing into your back. So there's an automatic connection there. I suppose in a way it kind of makes it easier to think about that abdominal breathing, that bellows breathing when you're standing than when you're sitting. So maybe that's something to think about, that either laying down or the other end of the scale, standing are useful positions for practicing that breathing. And then the wild goose. Remember what I was saying in the chair about the elbows leading. And so what happens, again, I'll exaggerate, the elbows lead, they begin to drop down, and the hands just get swung up. So you're far less likely to actually sort of find yourself stuck out like that and straining in your back. And the same thing as we go into parting the clouds. Okay, and then shake out. Now going back to that roll of the hips, or counterbalancing the movement, again, I'm going to take the stick. If I take this, if from here I lean forwards, I fall over. On the other hand, if I'm aware of my hips, I can get a very similar movement by pushing my hips back. Now, I'm kind of counterbalanced and I'm less likely to fall over. So what we want to try and do, we're going to do the standing version of polishing the table. And it's not going to be this, it's not this, reaching out like that, because that's what will happen. It's this movement here, the hips going back, that are really important, and the turn in there, and that will help you to understand the significance of this counterbalancing movement. And it's also, of course, fits in with this idea that the movement comes from further down, deeper in your body. So start with your hands in front of you like this. It's a tricky exercise. You know, you could just do it with one hand like this. So you could use it for a bit of support. That's fine. The whole point of doing this is to draw your attention to how your hips and pelvis are functioning and the significance of that. So doing it with one hand is just fine. So you turn, and then the hips get pushed. I'm really exaggerating this. You swing round and back. And then the other way. I suppose you could argue that this is like the tail wagging the dog, which of course normally we would regard as a bad thing, but in this instance, then it's possibly a good thing. Well, it is a good thing. And then one more time. So from this position, turn one foot out, take a position forwards and begin to move your weight. Now, we're not tilting forwards here. However, we still want to feel that pull down through the hips. Still want to be aware of that. So that if we did go too far forwards and start to stumble, the hips are ready for us. They're ready to drop. I've likened this in some cases to being like if you drive a car or ride a bike, you might have your foot on the brake pedal ready, or your hands around the brake levers ready in case you did need to brake. And normal walking, which is slightly different, would involve a slight rolling of your weight forwards. It's a very efficient way to walk, but it's important to have that potential for the counterbalancing movement. So when we go to raise toes and heel, it's the hips that we really feel are sinking down, keeping us upright. Again, if I show you this with the pole, you can see it's moving with me. I'm not doing this or anything. So when I come to step in here, I still got that tent-like quality. But if I tilt it back and I go to step in, that's when I will start to fall over. So you can see this significance of recognizing the counterbalancing movements. I mean, I've drawn your attention to the hips, but there are others now on the other side. The back can be as we found in the chair when we were breathing forwards and backwards. Just aware of the pull of gravity through the whole body, but in particular that area of your hips, because that would help to keep your pelvis level. And as soon as the pelvis tilts, the body, as we've seen with polishing the table, will go out of line. That's not necessarily a bad thing if we do it properly with the hips going back, but we don't want to just sort of like lean forwards and find ourselves having to do that. So raising your toes and your heel. Your attention guides the movement, if you like, through your hips. So when we do Tai Chi, we're very aware of that, and that's one of the things that will carry over into your daily life with enough practice. And then stepping in. So in your own practice, always give yourself a few moments to every now and then feel what's happening in hips and lower back. And the more you do that, the more you return your attention to that part of the body, the more you'll feel a sense of connection there, as I say, out of the actual sessions. And then stepping through. So that eventually we replace the habit of sort of leaning forwards and straining, waving our arms around with a much more, much safer habit of allowing ourselves to drop. And hips are a key part of that. Then bring your feet back. Go back to your chairs. I kind of learned that by accident, almost. What I did was when I had been doing Tai Chi for about 3 years, I guess, and I was going to visit a friend. It was in the winter. You might have heard me say this before. I came across a bit of paper that had a slight slope down, and I hadn't realised before. And as I sort of stood on the slope, it was a bit slippery underfoot, and I slipped back like this. And my instinctive response was to do this rather than this. It wasn't very graceful. So no, I mean, I was a bit like that, but I did actually stay upright. Which is, I didn't really care how it looked at that point. Interestingly, it was in front of a pub, and there was a couple of people sitting outside the pub. It was quite cold, and when they must have seen me slip, because they were half out of their chairs. You know how you see someone like you go to help somebody. They were convinced I was going to go flat back. They were quite surprised when I was still upright. And basically, that's just, I hadn't thought that through before. I hadn't sort of thought, oh yes, this is what I need to do. Just that this is how we begin to work these things, and our responses begin to change. So if you do it in the Tai Chi practice, then you'll eventually be able to do it at other times. So coming back to this central state, if the tent-like image works for you, then use that. Just let your arms drop down and embrace tiger, return to mountain. And rest. Okay, we'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, thanks.
I hope that was useful to you. So
Yes.
take